Welcome back to another episode of the I Hate It Here podcast. Today, I'm excited that I have not one, but two guests to talk about my topic. People leaders have seen so much rapid change from a competitive talent market to mass layoffs. We have been through it. But there's one feeling that has remained pretty consistent and top of mind for a lot of HR leaders. How do we retain our top talent? So today's episode, I'm bringing you not one, but two amazing guests who have spoken to over 200 people leaders and have heard it all. From calendar redesign, human capability, to the Goldilocks of spreadsheets, these two have dug deep with people leaders about the challenges we're facing and the unique solutions we've created. Joining me are Daniel and Steven Huerta, the co-hosts of the Modern People Leader podcast. Daniel is the co-host and co-founder of the Modern People Leader. He has an unconventional path into the HR world. Prior to going full-time on the Modern People Leader, he spent over 8 years on the marketing side for some of the most influential HR tech companies like Humu and Udacity. In his free time, you can find him golfing, playing basketball, or watching his favorite TV shows with his wife. Steven is the other half of the Modern People Leader podcast. When he's not working on the podcast, he's working with clients at Huerta Global, his personal entity for consulting work and side projects. Previously, he spent 15 years on the HR side and ran Workify for 9 years before selling that business last year. Y'all, I'm so pumped to have you here. I'm like internet fangirling right now because I've watched so much of y'all's content. Welcome to the I Hate It Here podcast.
And the feeling is mutual. We are also, fanboying as well. And by the way, you crushed that intro.
Hell yeah. I always butcher the intro, y'all, or I stumble over it at one point. It's the end of the day. It's my 5 p.m. and I've had a day. It's a Monday. So you all know I had about 80,000 Slacks waiting for me when I opened my computer this morning. So it's been some time. Steven, welcome. I'm pumped.
I'm so stoked to be here. We've been looking forward to this one for a while, so I'm super excited.
And we finally got to meet in Vegas this year.
We did, yeah. I feel like we didn't get enough time, enough one-on-one time. There was a lot of walking past each other in the hallway, or I think maybe I said hello to you. We talked 30 seconds, but I'm glad that we're doing this and having a proper one-on-one. Or I was definitely.
I'm always overwhelmed in person. I used to be, before the pandemic, I would call myself a really skilled extrovert. Now, post-pandemic, I am so awkward. I just do weird shit and I don't know how to talk to people and I get distracted easily.
I was telling Steven that I feel very similar to you in that way. I used to be a massive extrovert. I was always doing something. And then now sometimes I just feel really awkward. But I'd say by the last day of Transform, I felt like my social skills were peaking. Did you feel that way?
Really? I was so tired. I was I don't want to talk to another human at all. I was I don't want to put on pants
also felt that.
For a third day in a row. I was I don't want to wear pants anymore. I just want to be in my sweatpants at home and my slippers. I was not well by the last day of Transform. It was a lot. It was a lot of It was my first, not my first conference, but it was just really big and a lot of people that I knew in one place. And I was too overwhelmed. And then I felt I couldn't give anyone my attention. So
that's real. For me, it's a weird. So I miss you guys at Transform. I didn't go this year, which is a bummer, but we had some other cool things going on. But for me, I'm an extroverted introvert. I have learned. I didn't realize these words in language. It didn't exist when I'm the old head of this group, of this conversation. And these things just didn't exist. And so everyone would always be oh, I was always the guy nominated to be if you broke into groups, I was the spokesperson of the group, or I was always being the person put up to talk or whatever. But over time I realized that I don't really thrive in that. I get some enjoyment from it, but I actually like being on my own. And so the flip side has happened for me. So with the pandemic, I've been holed up and I haven't gotten my extroverted time in. And so you can ask Daniel, I go to these events and I'm just you would think that it was Christmas or something. I'm so happy. I'm oh, da, 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 da. Let's chat.
Steven's my hype man. I feel if you're with Steven, he just gives you that energy.
Yeah.
Everyone needs one.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
Meanwhile, I'm in the corner in head to toe black, trying not to make eye contact with anyone because I don't want to talk to anyone.
Well, so here, real talk. I have had to retrain myself on approaching people. This sounds super weird, but like you're sitting at the conference and there are literally like thousands of people like out there and they're like talking. And to me, it seems like they're like naturally congregating and like having these like amazing, like super witty and funny conversations. And then there's me like standing alone at my table and I'm like, okay, I don't want to bother them and I don't want to interrupt them. So I'm just going to kind of hang out here. And so I've like had to retrain myself like, nope, you're going to like literally go to every table and probably get rejected by half of them because that's called networking. Like that's just the way it is. And you're not going to leave this room until you've gone to every single table or walked by every single table, whatever like my hack is. And so I was in Lisbon and I found myself in a similar situation last week where like I was there were tons of people. And I was like, I've got to make use of this time. And so I just like had to power through it. But it is like this weird existence, I feel like, of like, what do we do at these conferences?
I'm going to take you with me from now on because I'm just going to take you. You can be my hype. Actually, my friend Anessa is a great hype woman. She will talk to anybody and then be like, hey, have you read her newsletter? And I'm like, hey, this is awkward. People are going to think I paid you to do this. But she like does it all the time. She'll walk up to random people and be like, have you read her newsletter? And I'm like, I don't know that person. What are you doing? So shout out to Anessa, who's my hype woman at almost every conference I've been to recently.
You need one. Yeah.
You gotta
that's
have
definitely
one.
Steven. Because if I walk up to a group, I'm probably not going to mention like what I do, but Steven would be like, hey, we're the modern people leader. Daniel is really good at this, this, and this. I'm like, oh no. It's like when your parent is like bragging on you and you're like kind of embarrassed, but you're like, this is also kind of awesome.
Yeah. I love that because we're all experts in some way, shape, or form. And I was like, we need to lean into that, like own that.
I do love that. I mean, that's really good. Now, when I walk into conversations, I just pretend like I don't do HR.
This is so, but you're literally an HR expert. You're a HR podcaster. You're an HR community. You run an HR community. But that's real.
There's more to me. Okay. Here's the thing. I got into this really weird habit where I would always introduce myself and then talk about my career. And then I got to this part where I was like, hey, there's like so much more to me than just this job that I do that I happen to like love and be really good at. But I kind of wish like we talked more about like our passions outside of work.
Isn't that what we're talking about today though? Our passions outside of work?
Yeah, we are. We're going to talk about some work stuff. So let's get to it. Okay. I've been asking every guest this season, what's one thing a company could do that would make you want to quit? And I'll start with Daniel. You have to tell us what's the one thing a company would do first.
So in preparation for this, I actually sent this question to like 20 of my friends and I got a very wide range of responses. So some people were saying it would be having a micromanager, to getting a pay cut, to not having like any room for career growth. I kind of like heard it all. But for me, I think it all comes down to trust. So if that trust is broken either way, like I feel like they don't trust me or I don't trust them, I immediately disengage. Like I totally shut down. It's hard for me to even complete like a task. Like I'm just like, screw this. Like I'm just going to sit here all day and look at like open job opportunities. And if somebody wants to interview me, I'm going to take that interview. And if I like the company, I'm going to take the job. So that's what it is for me. And I've had some experiences that like left like a really sour taste in my mouth, like related to this. So that's why that's my immediate response.
I have been there. I interviewed Minda Hartz one season in the podcast, and she's writing a book on trust in the workplace. And it's supposed to come out this fall. And I've never been more excited about it because I feel like people don't talk about it enough. But especially in HR roles, if you're not trusted to do your job, like why are you even there, honestly? I would say that for like a lot of roles. Like, could you imagine like not having that trust and foundation with somebody when you're going to work every day? It just like then makes you doubt yourself and you just like start to spiral.
Yeah. Or like when things start to get tough for a company and you start to notice like a pattern of behavior or decisions that are being made that just like don't line up with who they say they are. It's like I just don't trust you anymore. You know, like that's you're doing some sketchy shit and everybody sees it, and before you know it, like people are going to be leaving. So
Yeah,
it's just
that's a good one. Stephen, what do you have? Does it one up trust?
I feel really basic. I really do. I'm like tapping in.
Let's hear it.
Tapping into my inner Gen Zer, and that is like in office work. Like if I have to work 100% in the office, I'm out. Like I don't need. I'm at a point in my life where a better way has been found, and I think there's data that supports that. Obviously, there's a whole there's millions of people on LinkedIn that would debate that. But for me personally, if the company was like, yeah, it's in office, and even if it was like hybrid, but with a lean to in office, I'm probably out on that as well. Because it just feels like I know what the reality would probably be, and now that's just like stupid. So we're like, you're forcing me in, but you're saying I don't have to be in. So like, that's it. Like for me, like I've got to work remotely, or like the majority of my job remotely. Now, if you were to like expand that and say like, well, what kind of Daniel type of answer do you have? I would say accountability. The second that I see people are not being held accountable, especially at my level, at an executive level, I'm seeing that people are not being held accountable for their responsibilities, but yet I am being held to a standard. And I see that incongruence in the leadership team, or even more specifically, the CEO. I'm out. Like, have fun. But this isn't the culture for me.
I, first of all, love that. I was smiling so hard when you said that, because I just had this conversation with my CEO today that I said like a deep source of frustration that's almost triggering for me is when people don't take accountability. Because I feel like as HR, we have to take accountability for everything, even things that that we did not cause. I'm like, I take accountability for problems that I didn't even know were problems until the manager brought them to me, to basically preserve the relationship for the manager. And so I was like talking to my CEO about that today, because I was like, it is starting to become like triggering for me when people don't say, hey, I take accountability for that thing I did. So I love that you said that is something that would cause you to leave, because I think now where I am as well, I would also say I have to go.
And then on Steven's point about in-office work, you'd be if we rewinded back to like, I don't know,
This is the irony.
2015, 2016, my first job out of college was with Steven. I was an intern for Workify. I was employee number like 3 or 4. And the company only ever grew to like, I don't know, 12, 13, 14 employees. But it was very much an in-office culture. And Steven's opinion on remote work back then, like you'd be very surprised.
You'd be shocked.
Like, Steven has like, he's come on a journey, like to have the opinion that he has now. I would have never guessed that.
Wow. I will say, like, I don't think I would ever be able to work in office anymore either. I've been fully remote since like 2019, and I worked like hybrid at a different job back in 2013. But like, if you looked at me in the face and were like, you have to get up and go to work every single day, I'd be like, no, thank you. I'm not good at that.
Well, and you're right. I just came from a time where it was ingrained in us, like you have to be in the office. There is no other choice. These like dry cleaners, like this other bullshit, you just need to figure out when you're going to get that done. Like that's literally everyone else that's worked in the world figured it out. Go figure it out. That was the era that I kind of grew up in. And so like, it's almost as though like I like convince myself that this was the only way and it had to be this way so that I would like succeed in that kind of environment. And then once I realized like, oh, wow, this is so dated and like just wrong, that I quickly changed my stance.
I remember being so nervous. So I think like in my 3rd or 4th year working for Steven, my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, lived in Dallas and we were in Austin. And I was like, okay, either I have to get a new job or we have to come up with some sort of arrangement to where I can live in Dallas half the time. So every Sunday I was either driving to Dallas or back to Austin. So for, half of my time at Workify, my last year and a half there, I was working remote. And I feel like that's when you first had the realization, like, oh, if Daniel can be just as productive not here in the office half the time, then like maybe I see a future where everybody's working this way. I don't know if that's when it clicked for you, but
Yeah,
It was all Daniel. Daniel, it was all you.
it was me.
yeah, I say that a lot.
You
I owe
taught
it all
him.
to Daniel, honestly.
You taught him the ways. Okay, so we got accountability, trust, and remote work. Those are 3 really good ones. Okay, thank you for sharing them. Now, I think we could do a whole episode just on those 3 things. But today's episode, I want to talk a little bit about like retention. It's my theme that I've been writing about all quarter. It's the entire theme of the podcast this season, like what causes people to quit their job. And so y'all have talked to over 200 people leaders, which my first question is, are we well? Because I feel like as an industry, we are not. What do you all think? How are people leaders doing?
If I had to rate it like on a scale of 1 to 10,
Oh, yes.
I'd say like a 6.
Ooh.
Yeah.
What would you say, Steven?
I was at like a 4.5.
I'm always more optimistic though.
That's why the balance works so well with you all. I'm like a pessimist, so I would also say 5. I'm like an optimistic pessimist. I don't know. I would say 5. I was thinking about this the other day. There's like so much on our plate that my head just like spins some days. Like I'm context shifting from like performance to talent to engagement to in-person event to connection. And I feel like every single day I'm just like playing a really bad game of tennis.
Yeah, I think it was David Hanrahan that put it to me this way. Like, not only do you constantly have to, juggle the things that you just mentioned, but you also have to be a macroeconomic expert and predict like where the markets are going.
Yeah.
And you also need to be like an operational efficiency guru and immediately have a strategy for AI, for not only HR, but the whole company and how. And so if we just consider that, like those 2 new things that are part of the job, those 2 new things are like, as of like 2022. And so in the last 2 years, we've added like these 2 major things to the job description. And so it's just unrealistic. I think it's unfair. I think you also have a new group of emerging leaders, though, that are hungry and they want it. And so I feel like we're in this weird place where there are some people that are like digging in their heels, like, no, like, hell no, I'm not, like, this is just messed up. And then you have another group of like emerging talent that are like, whatever it takes. Like, I've been under the thumb of these motherfuckers for all this time. Like, it's my time. So, okay, I'm a macroeconomic expert. Oh, like AI? Like, I got this. And so it's this weird time. And I feel like none of us, it's not panning out for any of us. It's like we're all kind of hurting from it.
I really feel like HR is having like an identity crisis right now too, because there's like a bunch of weird, I don't want to call it infighting, but there are like things that people are saying, like that some of us are like, you can't be saying that anymore. Or like working with the CEOs that are demanding everyone go back to the office. And then there's like the other side of HR leaders that are like, hey, the office actually like isn't that inclusive. You need to promote flexibility so that you can keep caregivers in the workplace, and working mothers have not returned yet to the workplace from like pre-COVID era times. Like we have yet to return to maternal working rates in 2024. And so it's like we've seen so much. It's just interesting. Like there's a lot of interesting like infighting happening in HR right now too.
Why do you think that's the case, Hebba? Like we don't get it. We see the exact same thing. And I will use the most recent story I tell is a story of a topic that Daniel and I were really, really passionate about. And we like one post, there were probably dozens of posts, but there was one post where we got a response and we were like, ooh, we did like the backwards like JK, like this isn't going to be one of our content pillars, and that is the spicy topic that HR leaders need to have stronger business acumen. And we got this intel from other people leaders. Like Daniel and I didn't make this up. It's not like one day Daniel and I were like, you know what? HR people need to be better business people. And so we're going to post on our LinkedIn about this all the time. Like it didn't pan out. That's not how it happened. What happened was we started doing these problem interviews, and that was the number one problem that other HR leaders were telling us. And so we're like, like how interesting. So then we put it out there, and it was like, well, then we had a whole reaction to that from, another group of HR practitioners and leaders. And so that's when we were like, like
we're the drama.
We're in one of those situations where it's like,
I don't think it's that bad. People were really mad about this.
There were strong opinions. But like, I mean, okay. So I took my current gig, and one of the questions I asked my CEO, I asked him a lot of really personal things, to be honest. But one of them I asked was like, are you interested in teaching me how our business runs? And he was like, yeah, absolutely. You have to know how the business runs to do your job well. And I said, I've worked with CEOs that don't see HR in that capacity, that don't think that HR needs to know the business and where it stands in the competitive market space, and what does that mean for retaining talent, and how does that inform your strategy internally on retaining people or going to get new talent. And so I made it a core mission of mine to find a CEO who wanted me to understand their business so that I could better help him. But I do feel like HR does need to have that business acumen because it informs so much of our strategy. And a lot of HR people are in like reactive roles, not proactive roles. So I'm assuming the people that were mad about you saying that are probably in like highly reactive environments where all they do all day long is react to the things that their executives are doing rather than think preemptively on how to be proactive. It's for me, it's like getting that piece of feedback that you get every year that you know is true, but you hate that it's true. And it's like, but you hear it over and over and over. And the point isn't that like one day miraculously, like that's the feedback, newsflash, I'm going to hear that for the rest of my life in some way, shape or form. The point is like, it's still something I can strive to be better at, like that
for sure.
And I think that's what's being missed by those that are like, oh, well, that's bullshit. I've been hearing that I need to take a finance class for all this time. And I've taken that finance class. I understand finance. And it's like, but that's not the full point here. The full point is we can all strive to learn more, to get a deeper understanding. And just as business evolves, our understanding has to evolve. At least that's how I kind of look at it.
No, I think the number one compliment, I've actually shared this multiple times on the podcast. The number one compliment I've ever gotten was from a head of engineering. I will never forget him. Love the man. He's great. He told me that I was one of the first HR people that he has ever met that found a way to delicately balance what the business needed with what the people needed. And I could only do that because I understood the business strategy. And so I think like if you are like, I'm an HR leader, what's in my toolkit? Number one is you better understand your business in and out. Like you have to. I don't think there's any way around it. And it's like, I guess it's hard to hear that. Maybe, I don't know. I get this. I mean, like I get feedback that I'm stubborn. So like I'm used to getting hard feedback, right? If you were like, you need to be better about financial modeling, I'd be like, I don't know if I need to be better about that, but like, could I understand our finances a bit more? Sure. But I don't think there's anything wrong with saying people need business acumen. Honestly, I just think a lot of HR is fighting because we're in an identity crisis. We're going from being like paper pushers. I hope that doesn't offend anybody, but like from executing like tasks to being these strategic figureheads in rooms that heads of big companies are looking at and asking really hard questions. How do I retain these top talent? What does happen if we have to sunset a piece of our business to all the talent that works on that set of business? So I think we're just like, we're in our teenage years. We're adolescents. And that's why people are getting so mad.
And I feel like on the employee side, there's also this identity crisis around like what it means to be an employee. Like how does work play into my life? Like,
Mhm.
how important should it be to me? Like, there's all of these questions that our employees are asking. So naturally, I'm sure HR is, having similar thoughts themselves, but also thinking like, how does HR play into this change?
Well, and I'll add one layer to the cake, the change cake, and that is AI. And I believe the way that work fundamentally gets done is changing, and like work as we know it it's just going to look totally different. And I see it at these AI summits we're doing where it's largely HR leaders, and where we do this like accelerated lean canvas to try to help identify opportunities for incorporating AI into our HR programs. And they're the highlights. One of the highlights is that HR leaders are still very, very limited in the range at which they can see how AI will change work. And that, like, the key thing that I find myself doing in these summits is like, no, like, what if there was a world that was like totally different? Like, what if it, like, we expanded our minds and, like,
Imagine.
right. And it's just really hard for people to do that. Although I think we can, if you've used, Gen AI, like, it will change it. It has definitely changed my day job. I know it's changed, Daniel's has changed. So, I mean, if we, just the three of us here, like, if we apply that, if we globalize that, like, the implications are huge, but we don't know yet what it all means.
Yeah. We're going through it right now as an industry, honestly. And I'm excited to see what comes in the next 10 years. I keep talking about that. I'm really excited about the future. I couldn't tell you what it's going to look like, but I definitely think a lot of HR people are opening up their minds to the way we've done work historically is not working, and what will take us to the future will look very different from how we've always done work. And I think AI is like a huge part of that conversation. So we've chatted about a lot of different things, the identity crisis HR is experiencing. I want to talk today I want to touch today a little bit on retaining talent. So y'all have talked to over 200 people leaders. What have you heard about retaining top talent? Like, any common patterns that you've observed? Like, are people talking about this, or am I just making it hot because I want to make it hot?
No, I mean, it's definitely something we're talking about on the show. I don't think we've ever had an episode where the topic has explicitly been employee retention, but I mean, there are definitely patterns. I know one thing that both Stephen and I have noticed is that the companies that seem to be retaining the highest percentage of employees have picked an edge. So whether that's with their work style, or they have like a set of philosophies, and their processes and their practices all follow those philosophies. They're very explicit about who they are, and everything, kind of comes from whatever that philosophy is. And because they have like such a strong, philosophy, and they do pick an edge, that attracts a very particular type of person that wants to be associated with that type of company. So it's just a lot easier to retain an employee where they come in having like a really good understanding of what it's going to be like, versus a company that, maybe portrays itself one way on LinkedIn or in the media or wherever they're showing up, but then you show up day one and there's a total mismatch in that experience. So I feel like it's like a pretty basic answer, but that's one of the first thing that comes to mind. And then, a close number two is like they make the implicit explicit. So similar to like picking an edge, we've had people on the show that talk about how they have communication playbooks. Like, this is the style, this is the tone that people at this company use, which is really helpful if you have people all over the globe in way different types of roles. Like, maybe you have a lot of engineers, you have marketers, you have people on the client success team, you have people in finance, and naturally everybody just like communicates slightly differently. So like, if you have some guidelines or some like cultural norms put in place saying like, hey, if somebody responds with one sentence, they're not being rude, they're just trying to like get to the point as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
So those are two that come to mind for me.
I actually love the thing that you called out about the communication playbook. That's interesting because I think so many people end up leaving companies because they don't feel like they communicate or accepted or are accepted into the company. And so I think like the concept of making it easy and outlining for everyone, like here's how we talk to each other, can do wonders for just like engagement and retention too.
So I agree with everything Daniel just shared. One add-on to his point around picking an edge. So I personally believe we are now in a dual labor economy, and I think in the dual labor economy is like in office and remote. And by remote, I mean like any variation of remote. And I think there's this huge pissing match right now between does remote work or not. And I think companies would be much better off leaning in. Like if you're in office, quit trying to convince remote employees that in office is the way or that that's like the right answer, and vice versa. Like if you're remote, quit trying to convince, because there are a lot of Gen Zers who are like, you know what? We've been, we lived through COVID. Like we want to get out. We want to meet people. We want to be in the office. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like just because we all have different preferences. We talked about it on this spot already. And so my view is like those are like the two prevailing like labor models right now. Choose one. Quit, exit the pissing match and just lean in, and really everything you do should be dialed in. If you're in office, like showcase that. Describe like what has come from that, like the great innovation you're doing at Nike or wherever. And if you're not, like talk about all the amazing things that are going on at your remote company and like all the benefits that you get from that. And I think that's just a missed opportunity. So that's one point. The second one is I believe that we are entering a new phase of, to Daniel's point of how people perceive a job. And I think that increasingly people perceive a job as something that I opt in or opt out of. And because I can opt in or opt out, like, it's more of a subscription to me. Like I'm kind of just here. I'm going to opt in, but I'm only going to opt in while like I believe all the things you told me continue to be true. And there's still a compelling vision for the future. And the second that equation feels off to me, I'm out. And, it can be really, really fickle in some cases why people will bounce. And so because of that, I do believe we're entering the age of personalization. And there are some companies that are way ahead in terms of personalizing an experience for their employees. And like what I mean, like when I say way ahead, I mean like so far ahead that they could achieve escape velocity at some point in time if they learn how to harness this and they continue to grow the way they're growing. And so those are kind of my two things on this one is like for retention, like, yes, lean into your edge. One of the two prevailing models I mentioned. And if, and personalization, like, if you're not thinking about it, then you're missing the boat and you're already behind.
Yeah. How are some interesting ways that companies are personalizing work that you've seen where you're like, I never thought about it like that?
I think one example that comes to mind is from HubSpot. And this might be a dated example because Katie Burt came onto our show like over 2 years ago and she's no longer there. I think she's taking a sabbatical or she retired or something. But
live her best life.
Right? But she walked us through how they had this opt-in process. So similar to open enrollment, they had an opt-in process for your preferred work style. So every year you can opt into whether you want to be fully remote, if you want to be hybrid, or if you want to be fully in office. But whatever decision you make, they make it very clear what's going to come with that, like what perks you're going to get, if this has like an impact on your salary, like what's going to be expected of you from your manager. And your manager will get like a breakdown of their team and who's going to be in office, who's going to be remote, who's going to be hybrid. So I thought that was really interesting. And they also use technology to support this. So I don't know if they built something in-house to support this effort, which would make sense given that it's HubSpot and they're all about like personalizing marketing communications. So I'm sure they like use some sort of like homegrown tool, but I thought that was really interesting. And then on the, I guess something else that came to mind when Steven was talking is managers. Like that's where you have the biggest opportunity to personalize. And the number one response that I got from my friends when I sent them that question that you sent over was a bad manager.
Ooh.
And I think of one of my close friends works for a big airline company, and he's a bit younger than me, so very early into the workforce, like first job, and he's had 2 managers so far. His first manager was kind of incompetent, didn't pay attention to him or
Most
anybody
managers.
else on the team, didn't respect the boundaries between work and personal life.
This
Like the kind of
sounds
manager
like
that
my
like,
first manager, honestly.
yeah, like literally the kind of manager that like
Also my
wouldn't,
first manager.
that wouldn't respond to an email or a Slack until like 4:30, 5 p.m. on a Friday. So then, my friend would have to like, they would have like a mini freak out, go find their phone or their computer so they can respond and like hop on a call if they have to. That was the experience with manager number 1. They now have manager number 2, who is the total opposite. He, sat everybody on the team down and addressed all of their concerns and was like, hey, I've heard that these are like the 4 or 5 open questions from the team. One of them being like, what's expected of me as far as like, am I hybrid? Do I have to be, fully in office? Can I work from home whenever I want? He addressed that. He's given them flexibility. He also is extremely transparent about the conversations that he's having with the people above him. And he's paying special attention to each of his direct reports and giving them the support they need, but also saying like, hey, where do you want to get and how can I help you get there? And all of this is just like paying that extra attention to each of your employees and to your team. And it sounds so simple, but the companies that figure out how to like harness that and train all of their managers to give that extra attention and that authentic attention, which one of our recent guests, that's how they referred to it as. But I don't know. I think
really
that's like
that.
the lowest hanging fruit when it comes to personalization, because if you use your one-on-ones as like, I think of everything as like a salesperson. If you use your one-on-ones as a way to like constantly, be doing discovery and figuring out like the pain points of their experience at work, then you're going to be able to better retain them and create a flexible custom solution that works for them. So
yeah,
that's sorry I rambled a bit, but
no, that was
comes to mind
amazing.
for
Because
me.
I think about managers quite a bit. Like I tell managers all the time, you should be asking 2 questions. Like these 2 questions are my go-to for every manager. How do you prefer to receive feedback? And how do you prefer to receive recognition? And that's just basically around personalizing 2 very important things you do as a manager and customizing it to each person on your team. Where I've seen managers terribly fail is when they take how they want to be managed and then manage their team like that. I'm like, your team is not just like you, unless you have a really bad bias hiring process and you did just hire like 5 people just like you. But like chances are we're all different. But like I feel like we're missing that piece in the workforce, because like back then you just like were expected to show up and do your job and like not complain. And I feel like Gen Z has definitely pushed the boundaries on, hey, that's not, my life is not this job. And I am not just a robot who comes here and clocks in and clocks out. I want you to personalize the way you manage me. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about common patterns you've observed. Is there anything you've been surprised to learn when you've talked to like all these leaders, or even in your personal experience, about when it comes to retention, like actually holding on to top talent?
So I don't know if this like answers your question, but, and I also think I'm a little bit naive and I'm probably showing my age here, but when we went through the process of doing the customer development interviews and figuring out like what's the number one pain point of people leaders, it always came back to, I think the way that we had the problem statement defined was there's no standard definition of a modern people leader. Therefore, no standard definition of a chief people officer. Therefore, there's varying expectations from boards, from CEOs, from fellow leaders. And then it was like, okay, well, what's like the problem behind that problem? And then it's like, okay, well, the people that are making the decisions for the most part or have the biggest influence on these decisions are typically the financial institutions, whether that's a venture capital firm or a PE firm. It's always they're the ones that sit on the board. They're the ones that at the end of the day have final say. So I guess my biggest surprise is that like a lot of times when you see, these headlines on the news, like CEO says this after does this, or company surprised by this after this. In my head, I'm thinking, oh, like that was a decision that was made by the board that was probably heavily influenced by somebody that's probably like a partner at a VC firm. And then now they're, this is what's happening. So I don't know. I don't know if that's a great answer, but like, it never really occurred to me how much influence the money people have on your retention strategies.
Money makes the world go round.
Yeah.
I guess
it's always the money.
The biggest observation for me, I think, or the surprise is, and I don't know if there's data. We're interviewing Nick Bloom soon. I think in like a month we'll be interviewing Nick, and I'll have to like go back to this episode, listen to it so I can remember to ask him.
Yes.
But as it relates to retention, the biggest surprise I have is I thought more people would be leaving their jobs after being forced back into the office. So I think there are really shitty companies out there that are doing really shitty things, and people are still...
It's a weird market.
They're retaining
It's a weird
employees.
Market.
And so maybe that is the bigger point here, that depending whether it's a buyer's or seller's market, it really changes the dynamic of retention.
Yeah. It feels icky, but like I'm constantly thinking about like who has the power. Is this like an employee market or an employer market? Because I'm fascinated by the decisions employers will make when they have the power. And like some might say like, oh, they always have the power. Hebba, like you're being silly, like not thinking that companies don't have the power. But there was one point during COVID, like probably 2021, yep, where I really felt like the employees were driving everything.
Yeah.
And I was just like along for the ride saying yes because I couldn't say no.
I honestly think I agree. And I think that's part of the reason we saw the pendulum swing back so hard the way it did. Was like, you know what, guys? you think you have the power, but let's show you. Let's remind you. Yeah, just a little reminder who actually has the power here.
Yeah, it was that to me is always the buyer, the seller market, or the employer versus employee market. I'm fascinated by it because I think it tells you a lot about someone's strategy and how they feel about the power that they can command and wield over employees.
Well, and I think
it's sad.
This is my call to action on the topic for the brands that are like, there are a lot of brands that are just sitting out there waiting, like, how is this going to play out? Like, what is it going to be? Yeah, I am a big believer that these kind of weird markets are a perfect opportunity to stand out and differentiate yourself. And and put otherwise, when everyone's rocking, you should be rolling. And there are not as many people rolling as I thought that there would be in terms of like really capturing this opportunity. And I think that is the real call to action. I think as things stabilize, we're going to see some companies get really far ahead. But that's I guess another surprise for me.
I guess when I think about companies that are getting really far ahead, one that comes to mind is Zapier. Obviously, like I have no visibility into like their actual like performance internally, but from what I've observed from interacting with their chief people officer twice on the show, and on the last episode, they had we had the CPO plus their CEO Wade, and
fun.
It's little things like their talent mobility strategy.
Okay.
Like it all like rolls up to what they feel are their advantages as a company. And for them, that's, I'm going to butcher this, I think it's like data science, engineering, and agile. I think those are like their three competitive advantages. So they have internal pathways if you want to go on one of those routes. So let's say you're a recruiter and you have some interest in becoming a data scientist. They have content that's built out by their data science team on like how to get from a beginner in data science to intermediate. And once you reach a certain point with the coursework, which is a combination of like outside coursework and stuff that their team has like put together themselves that's relevant to just their company, then you can enter yourself into like an internal talent pool. Like I feel like it's companies that get really creative like that are really retaining their employees, because if I'm a Zapier employee and I'm 23 and I enter the company on the sales team and I'm like, you know what? I really like this company, but like fuck being an AE. Like I just don't enjoy being a salesperson. Like, can I maybe go be like a product manager? Like, oh, well, actually we have this agile internal pathway that I can start learning more about. And as soon as a role opens up, I can throw my name in the hat. So I don't really hear of that many companies that, okay, that's not true. I'm sure that public companies have a lot of this stuff figured out, but private companies, I feel like a lot of private companies don't have like a really buttoned up talent mobility program.
I mean, it's so important. Like that concept of workforce agility is really interesting, because they're saying, I don't know if you read those World Economic reports, I'm butchering it. It's the end of the day. I'm so tired. But they are saying that like we are going to need we're missing like 40% of the skills we actually need to take us into like the future. And so if you're thinking about like, how do I keep if I have these really talented people in-house, how do I keep them? It's like, teach them that they can do other things at your company. But I get so sad when I see roles that the only way someone can advance is like to become a manager. I'm like, that's like shooting yourself in the foot. Like you should have an IC path, you should have a manager path, and you should also have you love working here, but you want to change the function of your job and you want to learn something new. Like that is a winning strategy every time. I would bet on that.
Well, I just think of my two brothers, and they're very different people. So my older brother knew who he wanted to be from the age of like 13, 14. He was like, I'm going to go to finance school. I'm going to get a 4.0 in college, and then I'm going to go straight into investment banking, and then I'm going to go into the PE world. Like
he did it all.
And he did it all. And
stressing me out.
Exactly. Me too. I'm not like that either, but I'm maybe like in between him and my little brother. My little brother, he kind of followed a similar path, but then after college, he was like, I have no idea what I want to do with my life. And he's in his first job and he likes it and he kind of enjoys the work on the finance team, and he's working finance for like a big corporate company. But he's like, I don't know if this is what I want to do the rest of my life. And I feel like a lot of people feel that. Like there aren't many people who just have their shit figured out from day one.
Yeah, you think I started my life thinking I wanted to be in HR? I started my professional career thinking I would never be in HR. So like, imagine my dismay that this is the thing that brings me joy. It's the thing I never thought I was going to do. So it's very interesting. Like, and I would have never, so, okay, my little origin story, there are lots of them floating around there, but this one, I don't think I've ever talked about. I would have never gone into HR had it not been for a manager. I was like on the path to be a product manager because I love tech and I love just products and how they're built and how people interact with them. And I was going on that path and I had a mentor be like, there's this role for you potentially on the HR side that I think you'd be like really good at. Like you really understand people in a way that very few people do. You have such high emotional intelligence. Like maybe you should consider that. And I had all these relevant skills that lended themselves to HR. And so I got to try that role in HR. And I ended up staying at that company probably for longer than I should have, because I just felt like the opportunity to try something new was like more exciting than just leaving the company in going somewhere else?
Earlier, I mentioned being at these AI summits that we're throwing and like having to open up minds to new possibilities.
Yeah.
And one of the notions, like I forget whether it was our Austin summit or Lisbon, but one of the, we do a workshop and, we're in the workshop and we were talking about talent mobility and we were talking about employee churn and employee retention and how we could make changes, improvements. And I was like, what if we were able to have 110% employee retention? Like, what if there was a world where our recruiting needs
Math is not my strong suit. I was like,
me neither. I was trying to figure that out in my head.
So what I mean by that is any employee that we lose is offset by internal referrals. Like,
okay.
Our retention and our employment is so strong that we just bring it in. It just comes in naturally, or we're finding it through our talent that is already at the company. Because right now there's a huge assumption that you're going to lose a third of your talent. You're going to have to replace that talent. Like, what if through these new technologies, like we didn't have that problem anymore? And so those are the opportunities for me. And I think we get to a place of negative churn or like 110% retention when we provide opportunities for talent development organically. When we bring down the silos of the organization, when we find ways of getting managers to quit hoarding talent and they start to think with an open mind of like abundance, not scarcity. And so I don't know. I have these like crazy ideas. And so when I think about retention, like what really gets me fired up is like, what if we were able to achieve these things that we just didn't think were possible before because the way we were doing it was just like, we just been doing it the same old way we've always been doing it. And so that's when I get really excited about like where we're at and the place we're at. Like, are we close to getting to that outcome? No, I don't think so. But I like, why don't we shoot for that?
Yeah, I love that. That also really excites me. I like geek out on that stuff. I'll be like, what about this person? They could do this job. And I think this person would work well here. And we don't want to lose that talent. Like they could work on this thing. And I feel like I'm playing this like really fun game of chess sometimes. And I'm actually really terrible at chess. So that's kind of funny. But that's what I wish more of us did, that we like really looked internally and thought like, how can I repurpose this talent that I have that understands my organization, that understands my mission, that knows my leaders and wants to stay here, but maybe wants to do something different? It's about taking risks. And I will say, like, as an industry, it feels like HR is more risk averse than any other industry.
Definitely.
Which is what I think holds us back a little bit.
Oh, 1,000.
Am I gonna hate for that? Probably not. Okay, last question, and then I will let you two go because I will let you two go because I've been holding you all hostage for like all of today. What's one thing about people leaders now? What's one thing you understand about people leaders now that you maybe didn't before? Like you've talked to over 200 of them, so let's hear it.
I always thought that. So similar to when I was a child, and I thought grown-ups just had all the answers. I thought that like, people leaders just had all the answers. And the one thing that I understand about people leaders now that I didn't before is that nobody has all of the answers. Like literally not one person that we've had on the show has all the answers. And it's almost like I've noticed that the people leaders that seem to be doing the best are the ones that admit that like right off the bat. They're like, I don't know what I'm doing. I kind of know what I'm doing. Here's what we're trying. Here's what's working. Here's what's not working. I don't know. I don't know why I just assumed that all the answers were there for some of like these like big names in HR, but yeah, we're all figuring it out together.
Make it till you make it, right? Just kidding. Just figuring it out. Steven?
I'm going to go a slightly different direction. So for me, the biggest surprise or realization is that Chief People Officer, CHRO, is the hardest C-suite job out there. And that is I did not fully understand that because I've been an HR executive. I practiced HR for 12 years and I've been an entrepreneur for 12 years.
That's your soul.
And I've been a CEO, but I haven't actually been a chief people officer. I've been like head of HR technology and diversity or head of VP of global mobility. But and so now after 200 interviews, and I understand the history behind why it's the hardest job because, Daniel mentioned this earlier. It is a different job to every single boss that of a chief people officer. And that is kind of crazy when you think about that at scale, that all of these CHROs and chief people officers have different expectations. They have different job descriptions. Parts of them, are similar and overlap, but all of them are unique. And it's because of the history of how that job's defined.
Steven, so somebody pitched me on a business idea for the Modern People Leader the other day where we work with PE firms and we help them create the job description for the chief people officers that they're hiring based off of each company.
Whether it's Modern People Leader doing that or a governing body.
I don't think we're going to do it, but I just thought it was an interesting idea.
But no, I
not SHRM. I heard that. Agreed. Sorry,
maybe
SHRM,
we need to edit that out. I don't know. But
no, I don't know.
That being said, I think that's a great idea, and someone do it. Just do that for the sake of all this, the mental health of all the chief people officers and CHROs and VPs of people, and et cetera, et cetera. It needs to be done.
Yeah, we out here struggling. I'm unwell. Just kidding.
Not kidding.
That was really real. Sorry. No, I do love that because it means I keep using this analogy. I worked with the CFO who was trying to help me better position myself as the head of people. And his feedback was, you do so many things that people don't know about. What if you just gave me a menu of every single thing you did and you were I really peak here and here, and these are the things that I'm going to need to delegate away or hire someone to do because I don't peak there. And I thought that was really interesting. And I went into my next conversation and my next role, my next set of interviews, trying to tell people this is the type of people leader I am. I like when we're scaling. I like when we're growing. I'm really good at the chaos and building foundational layers. I'm also really good at big picture strategic visioning. And those are the type of roles I want. But I feel oftentimes people will hire a people leader thinking they want and need one thing when in reality, they actually need something else. So I do love this idea of working with firms to get really good, clear job descriptions.
Maybe there's something there.
Somebody do it. Okay, this was so much fun.
Oh my
Thank
God.
you both for coming on today. You all were my first two people I've interviewed together.
It's a little bit harder, right? I've noticed that
it's so hard.
Yeah.
But then
I don't know how you do it.
It's also easier because once you get the guests talking, there's two of them, so it just kind of rolls.
Yeah.
But I really love hearing myself talk. Just kidding. Just kidding. I'm kidding. That's just a joke to end this on. Please roast me away. It's okay. I'm used to it. Thank you both so much for being on the show today. Tell people how they can get in touch with both of you.
You can go to either of our LinkedIn pages. I don't know what my backlink is, but yeah,
don't worry, we link it all. I'm just saying,
Daniel or Steven Huerta's LinkedIn pages. You can follow us, our company page at the Modern People Leader. You can go to modernpeopleleader.com if you want to check out any of our past episodes, and go sign up for our newsletter.
Hell yeah!
Every week we send out an email that summarizes the most recent episode. And if you don't have time to listen to every episode, that's a great way to catch up on all things NPL.
That's amazing. And I'll link to all of that too in the show notes so that you can click the link below to find that. I'm really bad at that. Whenever they're do directions, I'm I don't know my right from my left, so I don't know. Thank you both for being here.
I love the thumbnails on YouTube where they're
Yeah. Of course. We're being such dorks right now. Okay. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Daniel and Steven. This has been a joy, and I can't wait to join you all on the Modern People Leader podcast soon.
We can't wait.
Yeah,
we got to do that. We have to do this again.
Spoiler alert. Okay, bye.